You're listening to Tabletop Arcanum, a podcast dedicated to learning and exploring the hobby of tabletop gaming. Your hosts are Justin Taylor and Richard Geese, so sit back and relax as we talk, discuss, and joke our way through the hobby we love so much.
The fourth corporate war is over, and the big dogs have retreated to their corners to lick their wounds. That leaves everyone else to fend for themselves in a shattered world. And that's just fine, because you've got interface plugs in your wrists, metals in your limbs, and chips in your skull. You're wired in, loaded with chrome, and ready to take it to the edge. There's a world full of opportunities out there. Maybe this time you can do more than save yourself. Maybe. Welcome to Tabletop Arcanum. We're your hosts,
Justin
and Ricky. And as you've heard, we are talking about Cyberpunk Red, the Jumpstart Kit. Justin, you picked this up.
Yeah, it was launched at Gen Con and then hit retail shelves a couple months later. I think it was mid or late November when retailers started seeing it. It's still a little bit hard to track down because it's in hot demand right now. So we finally got around to cracking it open, reading through it, seeing what Cyberpunk Red's all about.
Yeah.
So
That's
while we're still waiting on the full version, this is like your beginner box to the Red universe, and this is kind of a watered down version a little bit, because there's a lot of actually, as we went through it, there was a lot of like, we don't have this system in this Jumpstart Kit because we wanted to keep it pretty simple so you can like get going and playing right away. But when refer to Cyberpunk Red when it really comes out, and that system and all the extra stuff will be in there, and you can take it to the edge then.
Yeah. Well, before we jump into any of that, we do want to go over our roll recap. I have played some Lanterns. If you couldn't tell, I have also played some Harry Potter. Code names. We did have just some fun with friends and their kids, so we did play a lot of toned down games, easy to play games with kids between 8 to 12. So,
right.
Yeah. What have you been up to, Justin?
Arkham Horroring, Marvel Champion, and some Marvel Crisis Protocol. Been kind of light, mostly because did some home improvement projects and other things going around the house. So the game time kind of dropped off a little bit as holidays kind of kicked up. And but that doesn't mean I'm not going to play a bunch of games in this next week or two here, even with Christmas and New Year's and all that, because that's what I do. So, and then on the tabletop RPG news, like we're talking about Cyberpunk Red, I've been reading through the Ebron Rise of the Last War. I've been doing a bunch of stuff on that. We've been progressing in Waterdeep Dragon Heist. You guys are about to find out some crazy stuff, and the heist part is about to really kick off into, well, technically the heist has already happened. You guys are just catching up to it. And then, let's see, we also had, in the last 2 weeks, I've also ended a 10-month campaign that came to a good conclusion. I ended a 2-year campaign that came to relatively good conclusion. Interesting enough, both of them came in a big boss fight that both are 5th edition, and both started with a, hey, this round, the big bad has vulnerability to all attacks. Pounce. And it was a couple deft big swings to just drop whatever the fight was. And yeah, that's I guess that's where actually, my tracker doesn't really cover when I record D&D. So I've played a lot of D&D in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, we're coming to the end of the decade. You've completed how many campaigns in the decade?
I can't count.
Or no, it was this year you've completed 2. You almost had a third one.
This year I'm on 3 already.
3?
Yeah, three wrapped up this year.
Beautiful.
And then I think that's all that's going to wrap up this year. But no, it's one of the things that we were actually starting to, I don't know, and in some of the groups and circles I'm in, stories need endings, even if it's not the end, and it's okay to let go.
Yeah.
To run a game for a decade it gets hard. Look at it almost like television shows. Like when you hit that 10th, 12th, 13th season, it can get rough.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll bounce back, but sometimes you don't.
You just start pulling stuff out of your butt and trying to keep it going. And
yep.
You can always revisit it if you ever want to revisit it, but it's good to have that ending there.
Absolutely. So, hooray to endings. End of a year, end of a decade, end of some campaigns. And not in a bad way, just they reach their natural conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
End scene, close curtain, roll credits.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a lot of recapping
in
a short bit of time. So let's start talking here about Cyberpunk Red, the Jumpstart Kit. First impressions. This is R. Talzorian Games. It's an RPG book, so you've got a couple things in there, starting with a world guide, an event, kind of a rules/adventure guide, some cardboard pawns, a set of dice. What else is in there?
The maps.
Yep, some battle maps.
Yeah. But, I did really enjoy the fact that my first impression of all of this, with the new Cyberpunk 2077 coming out,
mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people jumping into this.
Right.
Other games, other Cyberpunk type games, Cyberpunk genre games, have had video games in the past.
Yep.
Shadowrun being the big one.
Mm-hmm. And they just hit 6th edition or 6th world, so they're getting a refresh too, just like Cyberpunk Red is the refresh for Cyberpunk 2020.
Yeah, it's just seeing the 2077, all the hype for that has really just exploded. So there's a lot of people looking for that extra, the extra lore, the extra backstory, everything. Yep. So this is it's nice that it comes with the book with the lore and with the adventure, just to kind of give you that extra oomph to get you more hyped for it.
So the big thing, like if we go back in history, Cyberpunk 2020 is set in the future year 2020. Well, in a couple of weeks it will be 2020. Yeah. Much like Cyberpunk 2020 and Blade Runner and those other like high-tech dystopian futures. Back, I can even throw Back to Future Part 2. We haven't really seen those futures play out the way we have. Some of those tech devices, yeah. One of the worst things that ever really happened to like games like Shadowrun or even Cyberpunk a little bit is Wi-Fi. Because all the games and all the philosophy back then was not necessarily wireless technology, but like hardwired.
You had to wire into the system.
You would wire into the system, and you would hack the code, and you would, 13th floor your way into it, sort of situation. And you slice and you hack that way, opposed to like, oh, let me just pull out my phone, beep boop beep, done. I'm in. What do you mean you're in? Like, look, I can open the doors. I can turn on the lights. So. I think that's where both Shadowrun and Cyberpunk have kind of needed a refresh and updates in their systems and in their worlds to kind of help incorporate some of that, because that's what technology direction we've had. So, and
I do appreciate it does seem like they address a lot within the lore, with, in regards to Wi-Fi, where in previous games you can hack into the system from anywhere. Now it's, that network really isn't there. If you want to hack into that computer, you have to be local. Like, you can't.
Right. You can't hack into the major backdrop of Night City outside of Night City, typically. And a lot of it comes down to the lore, where it's a little dystopian in the sense of everything's so segregated and on its own grids and on its own network. So, by addressing it that way, yes, it can be wireless, but you have to be kind of on the local network, there's no real global network per se. So things like that kind of help curve it. And honestly, Cyberpunk does a really good job in the sense of we're not dealing with the magics. This is more hard sci-fi or fantastic sci-fi, where Shadowrun takes into the fact that there's magic and there's trolls and elves and and all of that.
Mm.
The Will Smith movie Bright that Netflix made is actually a pretty decent representation of what a Shadowrun universe would look like.
Yeah.
Where it's like, here's high fantasy, here's regular world, and it's smashed together, and everyone's just kind of figuring it out.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the greatest movie, but
yeah, still
it was
enjoyable.
interesting to see that in a live action format. Cyberpunk is more of Blade Runner. It is a huge, like, if I needed to pick one source of, like, hey, you want to get a feel for what Cyberpunk world is like, just watch Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And then, now I can say go play 2077. The other thing that the whole reason why Red actually exists is because we're jumping to, the video game's going to jump to 2077 in the timeline. Red is accelerating the timeline from 2020 to about the 2030s, 2040s. So it's not pushing.
I think it was 2045 is the present day,
right?
Quote unquote. So it's nice to see that for those who have played previously, seeing it go from 2020 to 2077.
Right.
For those who've never played but are going to be all about 2077 when it comes out, it's nice to see what led up to this.
Right. And some of the interviews and some of the time, I had a couple talks over this year with Mike Pondsmith, who's like the father of Cyberpunk. And one of his intentions was to work with the CD Projekt Red team and his company, Artalzorian, to kind of co-create the lore. So as with Red, they're creating an NPC that's in Night City who does this. All of a sudden, that's going to be a data file that you can read in 2077 about this person. Then in 2022, they did this. In 2043, they did this. And likewise, as CD Projekt Red is coming up with stuff to incorporate into their game to make it, it's a video game, so they have to. The storytelling's similar but different. They're actually telling, Artalzorian, like, hey, we've got these things, and Artalzorian's taking, like, great, we'll just slot them into our lore. There they are. So, like, I'm really interested in seeing, next year when 2077 actually comes out, and the full Cyberpunk Red book comes out. Because, again, this is just a beginner box. It's really just to get your taste wet and get you excited. And it does that. I just want to gather and eat lore at this point. Yeah.
And you talked about how you talked to Mike Pondsmith before. And you had an awesome story. I know we've talked about it on the show before, but I did I always enjoy hearing you talk about the Artalzorian games and CD Projekt Red, how they really got that connection,
right?
With
because essentially it was the CD Projekt Red guys in Cyberpunk 2020 was their college D&D game. That's what they played growing up, and so they fell in love with Cyberpunk, went off and made The Witcher and made a name for themselves. Otherwise. But, like, in their heart of hearts, they're fanboys of Cyberpunk. So 2077 is going to be... It's going to be interesting because I think it's going to be really cool for people who are into the Cyberpunk genre and are really looking for, like, the deep dive, the finite details. Is it going to be a fun, regular gamer game? That's what I think is going to be wait to see. But those who love lore and detail, and you can even see it in the Witcher series... There's a lot of love and craft to the source material. So, they reached out to Mike, apparently, and it was like, hey, do you want to come to Poland? Yeah. And he's like, oh, okay, let's... He was approached, and nothing ever really worked as far as a video game in the Cyberpunk world, and it's just like, nah. But the love and passion that they have and what they did with the Witcher series pretty much gave him the comfort that Mike was looking for and saying, I can trust you. Yeah. I think you guys are going to do justice to this. Let's do this. Yeah. And
a little more background on that. They invited him out to Poland. They're Polish. So
right.
Cyberpunk, Mike Pondsmith, okayed Cyberpunk to be translated.
Mm-hmm.
So with CD Projekt Red being out in Poland, they eventually got a copy and
right,
like translated for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they got into it.
Yeah, it was like this one of the things like, oh, what other languages do we want to translate this into? And like, yeah, they dove into it. So small little thing, like one person in the translation group in Artalzorian is why we're getting a AAA video game now.
Yeah.
So it's awesome. I'm really excited. They're really excited. I can, talking with the Artalzorian guys through at Gen Con or Gamma, or I actually came across them a couple times this year throughout several different events, and they're stoked about Red. And there's other things coming out that aren't actually announced yet, and they've teased and they've talked about some things, and they kind of had like minis at Gen Con painted and shown off. So I think 2020 is the year of Artalzorian.
Yeah.
Like, it's the year of Cyberpunk. It's Cyberpunk 2020. It is 2020.
Yeah.
Let's do this. So, opening the box, you get a lot of stuff. One nice little touch that they did do is there is a voucher for getting
discounted.
The discount rate for Drive-Thru RPG. So you can get if you have a virtual table, you can get a discount. You can have the physical material for your reference, and then you can get the digital
PDF,
materials.
Yeah,
too.
for $8 instead of the $15 that they would charge online, and that would just be for the Jumpstart Kit books themselves. Right. I mean, when you get the actual box, you get all the extra fun stuff.
Right.
I do have to say, I really love the new art. I mean, I loved the art growing up with like Cyberpunk 2020. I love the art. The art, it just screams like 90s, 80s.
It does.
Yeah.
And it, honestly, I can't fault it because that was the RPG and art style for those eras. You can take a look at AD&D 2nd Edition Dungeons and Dragons. Art style is, art format is relatively the same. The West End Games Star Wars editions. Art style, very similar. Not necessarily like, oh, this is the same art, but like a lot of it was black and white. It wasn't high, there was detail, but it wasn't like fine art detail that we get now, that we expect now out of our RPG products. So, yes, the art direction is much more fine, much more dialed in, and a lot crisper. I'm just loving the game system from just... I've played D&D for many years. I've played simple systems, complex systems. This one's hitting a little bit in the middle. Really, you're using a 10-sided die and a 6-sided die. That's it. I've used single die systems. I've used, D&D, which uses every die under the face of the earth.
Yeah.
I've even played Dungeon Crawl Classics, which use even more random dice, like a D30. Because, sure, why not?
Yeah.
So having it boiled down to like, okay, you get a 10% chance on most things if you need a 10. Great. So it's almost like a metric system worth of systems, which I dig. So getting out of the box, you get all that. You get the stands and stuff like that, which you come to expect with Pathfinder did it and a couple other. So if you actually aren't the Theater of the Mind group and you actually do want to use minis and a map, the system's there for you. And some of the props are there for you. So, a lot of neat stuff right out of the box.
Yeah.
Again, other thing we noted is this is a little watered down, so some of the systems are either stripped of the complexity or non-existent in a couple aspects because they only have a few of the roles that you can play. They don't have all of them. They do list them all. So, like Johnny Silverhand is a rocker boy, and they talk about rocker boys, and you can play one of them. But they even note like medias, execs, and lawmen are not actually part of the Jumpstart Kit, and they'll be part of the core rulebook when they come out. But they talk about it, and that's what I kind of appreciate. Is like these are things that can exist, and as a GM, you can actually take that and kind of put it in your head and maybe not have rules for it, but at least, okay, these are other types of characters that can exist and incorporate into your NPCs and such. But yeah, you kind of, and then what I really dug, I don't know if you caught this, Ricky, one of the things I actually really liked about it was the statistics and how you generate them in this game. So you can either take up a straight template, or there's like 3 models of making your stats. So like template, like pick one of these sets of numbers, plug them into those spots, and that's what you get. There was the Edge Runner, which is a fast and dirty system, which will be in the core book, but essentially you'll roll on a series of tables to generate your stats. And then there's the complete package, which is really your stat by. This is how many points I have. This is what I have to allocate to my stats. Which again will be in the core main book. But the fact that there's like kind of a light, medium, and like real dial, and they even talk about the benefits of like, this is the quick and dirty. Like, you want to get going, just use a stat line, go.
Yeah.
Oh, you want a little fine-tunement, but you really don't want to go, like, deep dive? Okay, here's a little bit of a hybrid system. And then you really want a number crunch? We got a system for you, too.
Yeah.
So, I like it for that.
I really do appreciate that. And they are... They are changing quite a bit of rules. They did announce that the majority of 2020, you can really fine-tune it, and it shouldn't be too difficult to get it onto the new system. So if you're someone who wants to play 2020, then move eventually down the line to...
or you're currently playing 2020 and you want to transfer to the red system, you can.
Yeah.
I feel like it's going to be a little bit more like when... D&D went from like 2nd edition to 3rd edition, or like 3rd edition to 4th edition. Like, there's gonna be some wiggle room that you're gonna have to work with, but it's not impossible. One of the things I do also appreciate, and what I found was a little odd, was the shift in tone. So Cyberpunk has always been edgy, like high style, high edge, like push it to the limit. Like, your edgelord style characters that are in some D&D groups are like, oh god, the edgy rogue is so overplayed. That's what you want in Cyberpunk. Like, that is like your default. Like, everybody needs to be dark, gritty, edgy. But that's the genre. But more often, Cyberpunk 2020 was megacorps. Like, you had giant corporations, and they really ran Night City and all that. With the timeline jump, so we've jumped to 2045. There's been 4 corporate wars that pretty much knocked them all down a couple pegs. So there's no major government that's super powerful anymore. The U.S. is pretty much fractured. The mega corporations have pretty much chewed each other new ones to the point where they're licking their wounds and they're going to their corners and having to rebuild. So even they're not almighty, all-powerful. So there's like almost like not necessarily a power vacuum, but everyone's been beaten up and have gone back to their corners of the ring. And I'm just waiting for Corporate War 5.
Yeah.
Or World War, whatever the next conflict is. But that leaves you kind of in a very open space of things are a little bit wild, things are a little bit unknown, and you can take it as a GM or group, and you can kind of go whichever direction you want. Granted, with the 2077 lore, if you want to kind of keep it canon, eventually that's going to kind of fill in those gaps. But that's not going to be any different than Star Wars. So you're playing in the Mandalorian era 5 years after Return of the Jedi. So
Force Awakens.
You have 25 years until Force Awakens shows up. Granted, right now we're getting novels and stuff that are starting to fill in those holes a little bit. The Resistance cartoons fill in that hole, and we're going to get that with the time 2077. But really, it's an RPG world. Who has, you can play by the rules, and you can play by what's written. Or you can say, screw it, throw that out. I want to use this stuff. It's your game. Do what you want.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like Fantasy Flight's Star Wars, going back to Star Wars, talking about how I mean, you could be a Jedi, a full-fledged Jedi in the during the reign of the Empire.
Oh yeah,
where that would mean instant execution. You're being tracked down by.
You may not want to flash your lightsaber at every checkpoint, but
yeah,
it's a thing.
Yeah.
Hell, we just had Star Wars Fallen Order come out, and that's that era.
Yeah.
Is that dark times of like you don't want to be a Jedi, and well, Cal Kestis does Jedi stuff.
Yeah.
And bad stuff starts happening to him because, oh my god, there's a Jedi. What does the Empire do? They send the Inquisitors after you.
Yeah.
Shocking. But yeah, it's really interesting that like you can kind of take this for however you want, but you're backed up if you actually want to go with the canon and the lore. I was even surprised that they kept a lot of the name-dropped characters, Johnny Silverhand being one of the primary ones, that he's kind of been like an iconic character in the Cyberpunk universe. And Keanu Reeves is, quote-unquote, playing him in 2077.
Yeah.
Now, they haven't confirmed that, Johnny Silverhand is dead. But if we're talking timeline, he's, like, not a young guy in 2020.
Yeah.
So, 50 years, I'm not a young guy. Like, he should be dead. And there's an event in Night City that happens that he is reported dead, but nobody knows for sure. They have talked about 2077 where Johnny Silverhand is actually like in your head, and there's like essentially, I'm not sure how it's going to play out. I'm guessing it's some sort of like digital construction of him is downloaded into you, so you have like this ghost figment from the net.
Or, I mean, it could just be like Keanu Reeves, and he's technically a vampire and has been alive since the 1700s.
Nah, if you watch the trailer, he glitches out.
Okay.
So he's definitely digital, but how that happened, we'll have to find out.
That's fair.
You're just being ghosted by Keanu Reeves, so you have to deal with that.
So when it comes down to the downsides of the Cyberpunk Red Jumpstart Kit, and we can even just speak to Cyberpunk Red in general going from here. We won't be able to see 100% of the downsides just yet because we are waiting for the core to come out.
We can't even really see all 100% of the upsides either in that sense. But
yeah,
I think right now that's the issue. I need more.
Yeah.
The Jumpstart Kit is like barely an appetizer of what I want.
Yeah.
And I've kind of always felt that with the beginner boxes, whether it be the Fantasy Flight Star Wars ones or the D&D ones or Pathfinder or Starfinder, whatever system, all the Jumpstart Kits are there to get you going and get you playing if you've never RPG'd before. And they're great for that. They're not so great for established roleplay groups. You've never played Cyberpunk and all you guys have been playing is D&D for the last 25 years? Maybe you want to get a Jumpstart Kit then, because that's going to get you into a different system that you haven't used. Personally, I jump around in all the systems. I've RPG'd probably over, I've probably ran a dozen different systems. I've probably played in over 24 different systems. But I'm a kind of a rules mechanics guy. Not necessarily in the sense that, like, I just pick up rules. I love them. I like seeing how the different systems, everything has its pros and cons. I love D&D, and I also hate some of the rules in D&D and some of the restrictions of it. Everything's different based on the story that you're telling. Cyberpunk has a nice, clean, or Cyberpunk Red Jumpstart has a nice, clean, easy system to run with. I don't know. My concern is how much more convoluted is the core rules versus the Jumpstart Kit. And we don't really have that answer. And if they overcomplicate it, then we're going to get into the Shadowrun problem of having to do quadratic formulas to figure out the grenade damage because it was a system built by engineers.
Yeah.
When you realize Shadowrun was built by like people who were engineers, a lot of the systems start to make sense of why it's very mathy and crunchy. Because that's the type of stuff that they would enjoy. I feel my personal view on RPGs is you're looking for a rule set to give you the guidelines to keep the action flowing. Whether you're trying to hack into a system and you're doing net stuff, or if you're trying to, jack or do a showdown at a corporate facility, or just trying to get out for some ramen. Or, in the D&D world, like, hey, are we just trying to talk past the guards to get into the palace, or are we just trying to beat up this beholder in the dungeon? You want a system that's agile enough to keep the action flowing. And that's my only concern if they overcomplicate it in the core rules for Red.
The thing that I'd say is a downside, which is a downside for a lot of role-playing games, is since we have this time jump, since we're going from 2020, the original one was set in 2013, they went to 2020, this is going to be 2045. You are missing a little backstory by jumping into this. At this point, some of it's going to be explained, and to be honest, the nice thing is moving into Cyberpunk Red is the fact that they're not trying to explain what they think the future is going to be in a future that we're sitting in right now.
Nope.
So they now see what modern day technology is and how that would be disrupted, but you do miss out on some of the stories from the previous iterations, which Catch-22, I mean, you can go back, you can play it with the new system if you really want to.
Well, it feels like, do you want to watch the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie, or do you really want to go back to Star Trek The Motion Picture number 1? Like, it's there if you want it. I think Red is a great starting point, too. Yeah. If you just want to jump in, just know that, there's a lot of lore and history and stuff that you didn't get to play through. The resources are there if you actually want to dig into it. It's just, be warned, there's a lot of it. Yeah.
And it's also one of those, it's a plus and a negative. The fact that you can play Cyberpunk Red and decide whether or not you want to go back and play 2020 if you want to play original Cyberpunk.
Right.
Because you're starting to get a feel for everything. Things change between the systems, but not dramatically.
No.
So
not too bad.
Yeah. And like Artel Sorian has already said, you can really make Red compatible with 2020. So if you like the rule set after the new core comes out and everything is all out, you can kind of make it work. So, with that being said, who would you suggest this for, Justin?
I would suggest this for the RPG group who's getting excited for 77. If you're the hybrid gamer where you do a little bit of everything, this is a great starting point to kind of get you through that waiting period until April when we see 2077 actually drop and you can play that. If you're interested in a sci-fi game that isn't super mainstream as well. So you can totally play Star Wars, but Star Wars is pretty fantastic with aliens and all the other stuff that kind of goes with fantastic sci-fi and space operas. This is your dark, gritty Blade Runner universe. It's, synthetic arms, replacement cyberware with your eyes, data jacks in your head and arms. If you like Deus Ex, if you like Blade Runner,
Ghost in the Shell, The Matrix,
this is what Cyberpunk is. Yeah. Go for that.
Yeah.
If you're looking for more aliens and stuff like that, you're going to want to stick with Starfinder or Star Wars. Or Star Trek.
Yeah. I would say for anyone who's looking to jump into a tabletop game, definitely, especially if you are not looking to jump into something fantasy related.
Right.
Because this is a nice different path from like D&D or Pathfinder.
Right. And even Shadowrun has their 6-world starter box. But Shadowrun still has magic and trolls and those fantasy elements in there. Not saying it's a bad thing, but if you don't want a fantasy game and you want
exactly
you want your magic over there and you're not magic, cyber tech stuff over here, this.
Yeah.
So, All right. Any other final thoughts?
I'm looking forward to everything else coming out. I'm looking forward to the new core book.
Mm-hmm. Which should be right around the time that 2077, the video game, comes out, which is early April. So I'm hoping that they're going to shoot a little early and we can get it in like mid-March.
Yeah.
Is my hope, but it's going to be in that ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point, your friendly local retailer stores and your game shops might start being able to take those pre-orders.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, when talking with my new local shop, they're like, we can technically take a pre-order down for anything. We'll put you, we'll write it in our log in our system. If there's no date, no price tag on it, we can't tell you that. But we'll at least have you down so when it's officially in like our distribution centers, we can punch it in and we know you're already interested. So, definitely talk to them about it because it's right around the corner. Good timing.
I would hope that they would put it out a month or two beforehand, just because also
I'd say about a month.
Yeah, just to be able to also get the feel for everything. It is very, very cool that they are working with Projekt Red, getting everything synced up between this new system, the lore that goes along with it, and the game coming out.
Yep.
We have seen before Altelzorian. Like the Witcher RPG, but that's already based on a book. There's so much lore there that you can explore.
Right.
This is fresh made lore specifically for this book and for the game. So
yep, absolutely.
Very, very cool.
Absolutely. All right. So I think that just about does it for our review of Cyberpunk Red, the Jumpstart Kit from Altelzorian Games. So definitely get your hands on it if you want in this, or get that pre-order in if you just want to dive deep and get the core book. Next time on Tabletop Arcanum, we're not going to talk to you really until the next decade here. So in 2020, well, I have a giant Cthulhu sitting about 4 feet to my left, and I think, just maybe, Death May Die.
Yeah, we can definitely find some time for Death May Die. I do look forward. I mean, that's a beautiful mega. It's not a mini.
It's a baby.
And we probably will also
Cthulhu baby.
Cthulhu baby. It's like I was going to make a Mandalorian reference. I don't know if our listeners have watched it, so I'm not going to say anything.
It's my child.
It's a child. But we will also go over our 2019
challenges.
Stats. Yep. Because we do have a week and a half to push through as much as we can, get it done. And then on top of that, since it is the holiday season, if you are looking for a little something extra for the gamer in your life, we are currently affiliated with Hunt a Killer.
Correct.
And our code Arcanum.
So in Hunt a Killer, if you want to get them the gift of Hunt a Killer. The little mini escape room in a box. And it's kind of keeps going. So it's episodic. You keep going. And they're offering a discount if you put in the code Arcanum.
All right. Until next time, enjoy the holidays. Make sure to play tons of games with your family. Force them to.
Yes.
Force them to play games.
Yeah. Enjoy the last of the Skywalker arc, because that's going to be coming out here in this time frame too. So
this episode is going to drop the day after it's out. Well, the day of. We're going to see it the day before.
Right, of course, because we have to.
Yeah.
Because the internet will ruin it otherwise.
My dad will ruin it otherwise.
That's your problem, not my problem. So, thank you all for listening. We'll see you in 2020. Until then, this has been Justin.
And Ricky.
Wake up, samurai. We got a city to burn.
You've been listening to Tabletop Arcanum, hosted by Justin Taylor and Richard Geese, and featuring the original music by Paul Moore and Isaac Gilbert. You can follow us on most social media platforms. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts. As always, thanks for listening.